All right, so thank you again, everyone, for coming and staying. And obviously, we have a lot of prizes at the end and giveaways, so be sure to stay till the end. But I would like to introduce these two guys I found outside the hall here to present last second. Just kidding, Patrick and Aaron. They're from Rapid7. They have a great presentation, so thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody, for sticking around. I'm really going to have a tough time with this kind of thing because I'm used to running around when I give presentations, but I got to stay near the microphone because we're recording and all that. So if you see me start wandering over, I already told Aaron to make sure to chain me back down here. Oh, yeah. Well, I guess we'll mention that in a, yeah. So just tell me to get back or whatever. So who are these guys? Well, who's Aaron?
Yeah, we'll start off. My name's Aaron, or Aaron, as I get called all the frickin' time. Can't go anywhere without it, so I just have a shirt and I accept it now. It's who I am. So I previously was a Nix administrator. I guess kind of doing like sec DevOps stuff before the sec DevOps movement, but they just call me a Nix admin. I get a fancy title. And then I worked as a security admin in the financial sector, and now I pen test over at Rapid7. During the financial sector, I did a lot of blue team and red team type stuff, and that kind of transitioned into my pen test consulting career. So it's been fun so far.
My name's Patrick, and I'm a pen tester. I previously worked at the Akamai Cert, but been doing web dev. Has anybody watched Security Weekly ever? Woo! So sometimes Paul lets me be on that whenever Larry has to travel. I got a DEF CON 401 group up there, and I'm also the one that if you follow the Layer 8 conference Twitter account, I spam the heck out of you with messages constantly. And if you've been following that as well, we're going to give away a free ticket to the Layer 8 conference at the very end. I got a special person that's going to throw one of our little swag balls out at the end, so we'll do that for anybody else that is interested in that kind of thing. But first, before we start, let's give a round of applause to the organizers and the volunteers of this conference.
Stuck up.
Putting on a conference like this is a crap ton of work. I sometimes help out at another BSides that's a little bit north of here at some small town. And they're just kind of a lot of work. So those are the people that do it, so make sure you thank them. What else are we going to be talking about today? Let's see. Type of pen test that we do. At Rapid7, these are all the different types that we can sometimes do. Web apps, mobile apps, internal, external network testing, all types of social engineering, code reviews, red team engagements, IoT, lots of fun stuff. But there's only a couple that we're going to be talking about because we're going to be kind of telling stories, tell you different ways that we've done some of these types of tests, as well as mitigations as well, so you can kind of take these things back and fix them. So yeah, we'll kind of tell some stories with them. Starting with the external.
Yeah, sure. So like Patrick said, we'll have stories and just basic vulns. There's nothing rocket science here. It's all super, super basic. That's why the title is Easy Ways to Make Our Job Harder. Really easy things to fix, really easy ways we get in. I'd like my job to be more than 30 minutes on a Monday to getting into your network because I'd like to actually, do challenging attacks but you find boring ways all the time. So we're going to go over the boring ways. Please fix those. If you work on that side of the house. So favorite methods, we have like weak domain passwords, weak egress filtering, lack of multi-factor authentication, and exposed web admin panels. We're going to get over those, get into each of those, but this is for external network. So weak domain passwords, the downfall of pretty much every company who has to use passwords as their sole form of authentication. We'll get to multi-factor later. But we usually discover this through password spraying or a lack of network egress controls. So password spraying type stuff, before we can password spray a portal, we have to somehow get usernames. And thank you, handy tools like websites like LinkedIn, where everyone wants to say where they work and their names, and then you can do OSINT in other ways, the Harvester, ReconNG, Maltego, pastebin dumps, census data, Google, if they have null sessions or internal, you can ask the domain controller.
One of the other kind of fun things with this, I remember one of the, start getting into stories, I guess, a little bit already real quick. A couple weeks ago, had a university, and one of the nice things about universities is they have the address books. So one of the first things that I wanted to do was to get names, because that's the first step that we're actually trying to get here is usernames. So the way we get usernames is through names. And the way that we kind of get names is through all these kinds of sources. If you're not really familiar with these kinds of things, like the Harvester is a tool that's in Kali that's pretty awesome. ReconNG, Tim Tomes built that. It's also pretty awesome with modules in there as well. But one of my favorites is the company address book. Does anybody have a company address book? Don't raise your hand. Because I loved it when they have these kind of things, because let's see, if you work for like acme.com, one of the things that we love to do is we'll just go to your address book and put in @acme.com, and guess what most address books do? They're going to output everything. Maybe you got to put in like a wildcard or something like that in front of it, but it was super easy, just kind of dumped the entire company, first name, last name kind of thing. From there, it was just going to be a matter of figuring out what was the actual username format.
It's very, very common. I mean, especially if you work in a government type organization, when you're doing pen tests for cities or anything where you have to have that data publicly exposed because they're working in the public sector. Pretty common to go out there and look up and be able to find an employee directory, and sometimes it'll be like the web page is /A, show me everyone who starts with A, /B, and so you just write a quick bash script, curl, go grab all those pages, parse it all, grab the usernames with some set and awk foo, and next thing you know, you have a list of usernames that you're spraying against something. Huh? We'll get to the domain controller on the internal later. Yeah, I know. We talked about it for a brief second. So he's bringing up ask the domain controller. We'll talk about that in a little bit, null sessions later on when we get to the internal side. But if you expose your domain controller to the internet, one, well, that's a problem. Two, you should fix that to start. But two, once you're on an internal network, sometimes you can just be like, hey, domain controller, give me a list of all users, maybe through null sessions, where it doesn't require a username and password, accepts anonymous login. Like you guys know maybe the net user command in the Windows domain. Same thing. It's basically, that's all it's doing. It's asking the domain controller, saying, give me all your usernames. You can do the same thing. Or if you've compromised credentials, that's a great way to get all the other usernames and service accounts and start password spraying them. Another option, some companies think they're stealthy, and they go, oh, well, if we don't use first name, last name, or first initial, last name, something like that, people can't guess our username. So here, there's an example. The company uses AIU HT18. Well, what does that mean? I have no clue. But we were able to use FOCA, which is an open source intelligence gathering tool, to go scan the internet for documents and pull metadata. So FOCA specializes in getting metadata from documents. So if you publish like Word documents to the internet, PDFs, they have metadata. They usually have authors, and then if you can find the username format, since they were so brilliant and decided that we're going to hide our usernames and use these really obscure usernames, they incremented them. So AIU HT 19, 20, 21, 22. So instead of me having to go search all these usernames, I was pretty much able to incrementally go through them and find them. And then, so then you can start password spraying at that point and username enumeration. We'll let him take that over.
So a couple of the other ways that we often find what's the valid username format. A lot of times it's just whatever's in front of the @ sign in your email. So that's one of the first things that I'll try is just kind of go look to see what the email address is and see what's in front of there. Another website that you can take a look at, hunter.io, is kind of nice, where they tell you what a lot of different username formats are for companies. So that kind of works as well. So once we get usernames, we're trying to actually get access into the company. We're trying to log in and get authentication. So we got usernames. That's half the equation. The other half that we need is passwords. So what we're going to try to do now is just kind of guess at passwords. But instead of doing brute forcing, we're going to do password spraying, and there's actually a difference. Because one of the things that people will often say when we say that we're going to try to guess passwords, like, well, I got account lockouts, so I don't really worry about that. And it's like, okay, those account lockouts those are nice, but it's really not going to stop against this kind of thing so much, because what we're doing, when you think of the brute forcing and what the lockouts are going to do, is you start thinking that we're just going to go get the top 1,000 passwords off of the LinkedIn dump or something like that and throw it at users. That's not what we're going to do. That wouldn't work too well. So what we do is we have a pretty good idea of what passwords your people like to use. And we're going to show some passwords that I can guarantee are in your network, or might even be some people in this room's passwords. I've given this presentation, similar presentation before, usually to non-security people, and they come up to me after and go, I got to change my password now. Okay, that's good to know. What was your password, by the way? They didn't tell me. So what we're going to do is, since we know what common passwords are, so we're going to go get all those usernames and try one password. Is that going to lock out? That's one guess. That's not gonna lock out. And if we have a pretty good idea of what these pretty weak passwords are, eventually we're gonna guess them. And one of the things that I've kind of noticed is once you start getting up over 300, 400 users' accounts, we're probably gonna get at least one. Once you start getting up in the thousands, we sometimes get dozens with these weak passwords. So there's 3 that I try to tell people, do not let anybody in your network use these passwords, because these are the ones we're going to guess, and these work 100% of the time, at least one of them, usually all 3. What's one of them? Okay, some variation of password. We always see that. How is that still there? Once in a great while, I do see literally all lowercase password, and that person's just not even trying anymore. They just gave up. But we do see some of these really secure ones, like $, $, knowing that's like super secure, I guess, because somebody told them that. Yep, that's elite stuff. So that's one. Password is virtually always in there. What's next? Go ahead, shout it out. There we go. Variation of company name. Okay.
Someone get this guy on Jeopardy.
Yep. You'll take that for 200. So yeah, something about the company name. That's one of the next things that I'm always going to throw in there. Whatever your company name is, then maybe the year, maybe an exclamation point, something like that is always going to be there. What's next? There we go. These guys are on top of this.
Winners.
Season year.
All of you are winners.
Why does season year work? And it's because of our password policies. Think of what your password policy is. Your password policy is generally going to be, you need 3 out of 4, uppercase, lowercase, special number, right? And then we also require that they change their password once every 3 months. Makes sense, right? Because for security. So once every 3 months, what else happens every 3 months? Seasons change. And if you just put the year at the end, you're going to get something new every time. So if we do summer 2018, fall 2018, with an uppercase F or an uppercase S, we have our uppercase, lowercase, and our number. And if we really want to be secure, we'll put an exclamation point at the end. So then we get all 4. Okay? So yeah, those kinds of things are virtually always going to be there. So the next thing, where do we spray these kind of things? Where are we going to try them? Well, login portals is certainly a great place. VPN is one of my favorite places because once that works, we're in. You know, VPN gets you access to the internal network. And another one is your Outlook Web Access, your OA. And OA is pretty awesome because there's Metasploit modules for it that lets you do these kind of things as well. There's a Metasploit module called Auxiliary Scanner HTTP OA Login, where all you got to do is just point it at the IP address for OA with a whole big file of these usernames that we just scavenged up from somewhere and put in one password and say, go. And it's going to tell us which ones are valid. Even better is it kind of does username enumeration for us. We kind of see up there where it is showing us, you know, a failed login isn't any good. But even better, there's another one that says failed login, but username is valid. So it's doing that username enumeration for us. So sometimes when I'm trying to figure out what is the proper username format, I'll just throw it into this module and it'll tell me. I just used that this week and I did my little happy dance when I guessed right. But even better is it'll also tell us when we have a successful login. Okay? So this is, again, going to be that, that same Metasploit module. And it probably looks pretty bad. And I know a lot of times when we do our presentations, we create these little contrived models to put up here so that we don't actually show customer data. This is customer data. This was on a pen test that I did. And you kind of get an idea by the username, admin, admin, that it was probably something higher level. So most people have an idea of how these levels kind of go. You have your regular domain user. That's not what this is. Then sometimes you have a local administrator. That's not what this is. Then you have a domain administrator, right? That's not what this is. Then you have an enterprise administrator. That's what this is. I put this through, and because I had this access, I was able to see all the groups in the domain controller, and I looked up what groups is admin in, and it was in the enterprise admins group. I went over to my person I was working with, I was like, did you know that the password for your enterprise administrator is 12345? He said, that's the password for my luggage. No. Okay. Anyway. All right. So yeah, that's kind of some of the ways that we are able to do these kind of things as far as the password guessing. And of course, you know, worrying about getting our best summer ever as well. So I guess that's some stories, but there's one, I can't remember if this is where we want to tell that kind of fun story. Anyway, we'll go for it. So I was doing this password guessing on this one test, and sure enough, best summer ever, it worked. I had, all my users, I start throwing it at, and one gets me in. So I was spraying against the VPN, and I see that I got access. And I see that the password was just summer 2018. I'm like, okay, this is pretty cool. Sure enough, it's just about always going to work. So just by chance, I was like, well, let's make sure now that I'm in, because I got my inside shell and all that, I'm kind of zipping around the network. I'm like, let me just kind of check this with CrackMap Exec. That's another tool that we like to use against a domain controller. One of the nice things about CrackMap Exec, when you use it to log into a host, it'll tell you if it's a local administrator on that host by saying pwned, you own this machine. So I took that user that I guessed summer 2018 to get through the VPN and used CrackMap Exec on a domain controller. It said pwned. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. This user with summer 2018 is a domain admin? And sure enough, because of some other privileges, the person was actually just like an accountant or something, but for some reason the accountants had full local administrator rights on a domain controller, which I didn't understand, and I think they didn't either. So we kind of worked our way through that one as well. What are remediation? Well, we know that we want stronger, better passwords. It's probably not a good idea to make people be changing, and I think NIST also just updated their guidelines recently to tell you, don't make people change their passwords because of that summer 2018, fall 2018 kind of problem, that people are creating weaker passwords. The only time that you really want them to be changing their passwords is if there's any kind of indication of compromise. If you have a reason to believe that you've been compromised, change the password. If there's no reason to believe that there's a compromise going on, just let them stick with it as is. And of course, we don't really want to just worry about the security of usernames and passwords. So let's put that MFA on things. If you can get people to use password managers, that's great too. I know some people say, well, that's scary, having all your passwords in one place. Well, what's the alternative? I guess we can kind of discuss at some point. But anytime that we're up against multi-factor authentication, it makes our life much harder. And that was kind of the title of this, Make Our Lives Harder. So that's one of the ways with that as well. So I think Aaron's going to talk to you about SMB Egress.
Yeah. Real quick before I jump into that, though, I actually want to back up just a little bit. Yeah, not a story. I want to throw a couple things in there. So first, you have your OA login that Patrick was talking about before. We didn't have a slide in here for it, but it was worth a shout out. How many of you are using Outlook 365 instead of OA, your own local instance? Got a few of you in the crowd. All right. How many of you are using Active Directory Federation services in front of that? All right, we got a couple. Okay. So fun fact for you: if you're not using ADFS and using O365 all in the cloud, it takes your domain, the password, the ntds.dit file, basically, which has all the NTLM hashes of user names, passwords, syncs that up to the cloud, and then authentication happens against that up in your O365 instance. It never communicates back to your Active Directory server. Because of that, Microsoft, feature, not bug, doesn't want account lockouts. It doesn't actually enforce the account lockouts for O365. So password spraying up there is awesome. Here's another thing. Password spraying in O365, the activities logs that they give you, they suck. I'll just throw that out there. People have been saying, you need a better way to correlate passwords. So there's these giant logs of all these failed logins. And you can look up failed logins by IP, but you can't look up, okay, did the same IP log in to or try a failed login across multiple accounts. And so you can't detect that password spray without actually dumping all the logs and writing your own parsing tool to do that. I wrote a PowerShell script with a buddy recently to kind of do that and then look for wherever successful logins happen from an IP doing password spraying. We wrote it into the Activities API earlier this summer. 2 days before we released the tool, Microsoft went, the Activities API is evil, people are using it for bad, and they took it away. So it came back about a month later after they fixed some things in it, but they took away a lot of the functionality we were using to do that correlation. So now you have to export it to an Excel spreadsheet to do that, unless you're feeding everything to a SIM, or you're using Active Directory Federation services. That's why I brought that up at the start. ADFS is basically you log in through there and it relays the communication back to OA, and it works directly with your domain controller. So you can enforce lockouts, you can force stricter access controls, and you can get those logs to your SIM a lot easier. Anyway, I just want to give a shout out on that. Moving. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so secondary physical device as a key. Let's say you're using a YubiKey, something like that. You basically plug it in, and then you have to have that key plugged into your laptop when you log in with the password. So it's something you have, like something you own, and something you know. Yeah, it's like not SMS. You're not using your phone at that point. You could use the phone as well, but some people prefer to use maybe an RSA token. You have a physical token that generates your key. A lot of banks like to use those. I've seen that being pretty common until employees leave them in their desk with the little wafer locks that take 0.2 seconds to pick. Then that's another rant for another time. Yeah, anything else on this slide? Good, awesome. So SMB Egress. We want to talk a little bit here about, okay, I couldn't guess the password. Or maybe I guessed a couple accounts, but they don't have VPN access. They don't have email access externally. Not much to do there. So another way we like to capture passwords is we like to send emails with HTML image tags in them, or put on an Internet Explorer, a web page, image tag in it. But it's not a normal image tag. It's an image tag that's making a file reference. So instead of like HTTP website name.jpg for our file, it's file : / and then the path to our server. And what that tries to do is, Windows is awesome, by the way. It tries to authenticate everything for you, like seamless integration. Tell me to go here, and I'm going to send your creds along with it. And so when Windows authenticates over SMB, they use a hash called NTLMv2 or netNTLMv2. And whenever you connect to a file share or connect to something on port 445, if you're Windows, and that file share says you need to authenticate, the first thing Windows does is it takes the logged in user password that's trying to get to that file share. It takes the hash of that, the NTLM hash. It does kind of a handshake and authentication attempt, sends over the netNTLMv2 hash, which you can crack offline. We can crack passwords offline a lot quicker than we can guess them, millions of attempts per second. So we try to capture hashes, and then we crack those more obscure passwords. And we do that by putting in this image tag in an email, because like I said, Microsoft likes to authenticate to everything. If you open it up in Outlook, when you open that image tag in Outlook, since it's a Microsoft product, it tries to connect out to the internet. If 445 is allowed to egress from your internal network out to the internet, and you're running on Windows, opening in an Outlook, it's going to automatically try to authenticate to my rogue server. So what do? First things for exploiting it. We stand up an SMB server. And the SMB server is basically pretending to be a file share. Whenever something connects to it over SMB, it says, oh wait, I need you to authenticate with this challenge hash. Goes back to the client goes, okay, let me take my Windows password, hash it with your challenge, so we're gonna send it over. And then we send it over as a netNTLMv2. Then you can start to crack it offline. So we stand up our server. Now we gotta send that email to them. I created an Outlook plugin because putting HTML in Outlook emails, it's a little finicky. You can only do it if you're using like VBScript. So I created a nice little smiley face button plugin, and basically you click on it, you fill out your path here. Really hard to see in text-wise, but over here you'd fill out the IP address, so like file : 2 your IP address of your server, and then / again, some random image, signature.jpg, whatever, and then you send it. And it shows up as a failed to render image when someone opens it. They have to click download HTML images. That's the caveat, unless it's automatically set to download HTML images. But people like to click that. When they see this little X, they're like, oh, maybe that's something important, download images. And then, cool, we get a byte. When someone opens it up, we get their hash, and then we have their hash to try and crack it offline and find other passwords. This one was winter 2018 ! I guess we could have guessed that as well, but here's an example of kind of what the netNTLMv2 hash looks like. We used hashcat, we put a word list at it, and then we mutate it with a bunch of different rules. So we take all these common dictionary words and try every permutation of it using @ signs or A symbols, adding exclamation points to the end, common user behavior rules that you would see. We modify our list with that and run it through hashcat and try and crack things. So quick story on that. Flashback for a second. When I talked about you had to click download images, that's true. You have to click download images in Outlook. However, what if someone forwards that email internally? When you send it from an external standpoint, they have to click download images because it's an untrusted sender. It's an unknown sender. But if you're inside an organization and you send that email to another employee, and it becomes a trusted email and it automatically downloads the images, my fake SMB images here. And so I had a test And I had figured out they had 445 egress enabled. And I'm like, okay, how can I get their SOC? I want to start cracking everyone in their SOC. And I'm like, well, what do users usually do when they get a phishing email? What's the first thing they do with that phishing email? Anyone know? Send it to security team. A smart process for that is to save it or have a button that automatically does it for the user. But if you're going to train them, then train them on the response of save the email to a message file, attach that, and send it over to you. So you can analyze it, and that preserves all the initial headers. But a lot of users just go, oh no, bad email, forward, put in information security distro list, we're good to go. So that's what we did. We sent an email, and we just put like some Russian text in there and just made it look super fishy intentionally with our little image in there. We thought, all right, we sent it to the whole accounting team, and one of them are going to freak out and send it over to security thinking they're savvy. And so they did. Security gets it. It's automatically trusted now because it's forwarded from one of the users internally. It hits the SOC team, and before they knew what was going on, all they have to do is click in Outlook, the preview button. Like, you don't have to open the email, just click preview. Their hashes are rolling in, and then we start cracking them. And SOC, elevated users, they have access to everything. Go ahead. You can, and we'll talk about pass the hash later, if 445 is open externally. But yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But not pass the hash, though, not with net NTLMv2. You can do relaying the hash. And so we'll talk about the differences when we get to the internal. But yeah, so we got that hash, and we got a bunch of hashes flying in. We start cracking the SOC user hashes, and someone had a password. It was like Splunk admin 2018, something random like that. Maybe they just got done with Splunk training. They thought they were clever to do that, and so they put it in there. We cracked it in a few minutes. We had access as them. They had two-factor enabled on everything, except for their email setup. Well, their VPN required a certificate. That was the first part. You had to have a SSL cert to get onto their VPN. Or not SSL cert, but a client certificate. So it's kind of two-factor. It's something you have and something you know with your password. But they also had it set up so that their Outlook externally, they had the EWS path open. And so EWS is kind of like how your phone authenticates. It's also kind of for API calls. And you can authenticate and dump an entire email inbox bypassing two-factor. You can't put two-factor on EWS if you leave that endpoint open on Outlook Web Access. They left it open. We used his password, dumped all of his emails, and lo and behold, he was kind of a new hire, and someone had sent him or maybe it was his cert, that's what it was. His cert had expired the year before for his VPN, and someone emailed him the new cert for the VPN access that he needed for the Cisco SSL VPN. And I'm like, awesome, I have your cert, I have your password, and I logged into VPN as a SOC employee, and now we're internal. So yeah, SMB image tags, great way to get hashes. Make sure you don't allow 445 egress to the internet. You don't need it. Most ISPs block this intentionally. Onto remediation. But most ISPs block this from home users, so it's hard to test this at your home because your ISP is like, you don't need file share access to the internet over 445. That's a bad idea. We're going to block it for you. But for companies, they're like, you do it, your problem, not mine. So they leave all your ports open. They have to for business use cases, but yeah, make sure you restrict that. All right, you want to take over the exposed admin? Oh, no, actually, sorry, I'm going to continue on here. Yeah, because of the next story. So next one we like to look for is exposed administrative dashboards to the internet. So we get hashes, we get login usernames, all that. Sometimes we can't get them, though, or sometimes everything's two-factored. There's no way we're getting in that way. So we're going to look for some kind of admin dashboard. PHP My Admin is an option, WordPress admin, printers, web cameras, Tomcat, and JBoss. The thing is, when you have an admin dashboard for a web page, admin dashboards usually let you deploy new web pages or deploy code. For example, Tomcat lets you deploy WAR files, and WAR files can run Meterpreter shellcode. You can upload that. PHP My Admin, you can do a bunch of different SQL injection type commands. You can also deploy modules out there and have it run things. Custom admin panels usually have some kind of feature. And so a story of that is we were doing a pen test, and the devs had a admin panel out on the internet. And no one was opening our SMB image tags, or maybe egress wasn't allowed from client workstations. That was all blocked. But they had this admin server out on the internet, and they were working on this new dev website, and there was no customer data on it. So they thought, okay, who cares if we expose the panel? And the login for this panel was admin. So great passwords again. If you find a theme throughout our entire talk, it's that people are terrible at making passwords, so don't only rely on passwords. But anyway, so we find this admin panel, we log in, and very limited functionality. So maybe, again, that's why they didn't care at the time. They had the ability to pretty much set a log file path location to change the username and password. And I think it was to modify like the index HTML page. So I guess you could, inject some malicious JavaScript there. But there wasn't any way to upload like a malicious page at all. I couldn't upload like an ASP page. But we noticed the whole thing was running on a Windows server. And so we thought maybe this server can SMB egress to the internet. And there was a log file path. Well, like I said before, if you put in the URI path using a file share reference instead of like HTTP, so use 2 backslashes to a remote server, it's going to try and connect to it. So we did 2 backslashes to a remote server, which was our server on the internet. Apparently this server was in their DMZ, which didn't allow or didn't have any 445 egress restrictions. And then we saved the log file location, and next thing you know, this server is trying to output log files to our server. And we're replying back with authenticate to me first. And so it authenticates, and it's running as the domain administrator user for their company. So it's just administrator with their domains. We have that hash. And that hash was, or we cracked it, and it was like Heinz Ketchup 500, something like that. I just cracked it pretty quick. And now we have the domain admin hash, and that was pretty awesome, from external straight to domain admin hash. We still had to find another chink in the armor to get internal at that point, but still another easy way to capture a password hash. And then once we get internal access, we'll kick it over to Patrick for that.
I'm going to back up again on you. Okay. I'm going to back up on him now. So back here with our dashboard, this is one of my favorite things to kind of do on the pen test as well. And one of the ways that you can do this, there's a tool called Eyewitness that will go ahead and screenshot whatever is at the web ports. So one of the things that you can do is you can kind of go through and find all your open web ports, point Eyewitness at it, and it'll show you a screenshot of whatever is at that point. And a lot of times what we do, we'll also do this with the internal, but it's fun to do with the externals as well to see what's there. And sometimes when we get things like JBoss, like Tomcat, and these kind of things, or some of the other administrative dashboards, web cameras, and these kind of fun things, Google is your friend. So one of my favorite things to do at that point is, what is the default password for whatever the service is? And some way too high percentage of the time, whatever the default password is, does get us in. I remember being at one company one time and found a web camera that was wide open, wasn't even a password on it, and it was pointed what looked like, I'm looking in there and I see like server racks and cages in front of it. I'm like, this looks an awful like a data center. And you can kind of move the camera around, you can see people walking around. I'm like, this is wide open to the internet. Anybody can kind of see this kind of thing. So I'm doing the debrief at the end of the week with the customer, and I'm kind of waiting. I saved that one for the end because we're sitting in the room with all the C-level people and all the other managers and things like that, and I popped that one up at the end. And it was just a screenshot of the web camera being wide open to the internet, and they're all looking at it. It's like, is that our data center? And the guy, the one that was in charge of the whole network, was like, yeah, that's our data center, open to the internet. And they're like, why can you just get access to that? And I'm looking at him like, I have no idea why it's that way. And he just kind of really got mad. He's like, next time we get a phone call at 3 a.m. from our NOC, you can deal with that kind of thing. I'm just like, all I care about is that you password protect it, man. I don't care if it's still available to the internet kind of thing. But yeah, so those are some of the ways that you can do it. Eyewitness is a great tool to find these kind of things. And then once you find these open dashboards on your own networks that you can play with, test out some default passwords and see if they've been changed. All right, so we get our internal access. So fortunately, we're about halfway through our slides, so that kind of works out pretty well. Here are some of the favorite ways, and by favorite, we mean like super easy because we're lazy. We want the easiest way in. So whatever's going to be the easiest way in is kind of what we're going to try first. And these are some of the first ones that we are going to look for. Some of these things like the lack of least privilege, we go for the LMNR, like basically we just sit there listening saying, can we have your hashes? And sometimes networks say, yeah, sure, here you go. Whether you have the SMB signing, so we can then start relaying hashes around the network. Playing with things like Mimikatz, looking to see if your clear text passwords are just kind of stored in memory. Yeah. Sit with the LMNR one, yeah. All right, so the question is, are we sitting on the inside network with a sniffer? We're sitting on the inside network. For some of these, we'll use a sniffer, but others, it might be that we just plugged in. So sometimes just being in a network tap is good enough.
kind of rephrase it in another way too. So yeah, this is basically, we showed some ways we get in externally. Now we're internal. So we got in from the external. Maybe we got on your VPN, we broke out of Citrix, and now we're internal. We sent a phishing email, we're internal. Whatever way we did to go from external to internal, that's where this begins.
Yep. Or you just hired us to plop down inside your network and start finding fun things as well.
That one, I'm lazy.
Yeah, well, I am. I don't want to speak for you, but. Yeah, and I remember one time going for a programmer's job one time, and I don't know if anybody else ever asks this question of programmers. It's one of the best questions to ask somebody that's a developer programmer, and to see if they really understand it. Just ask a programmer developer, are you lazy? I remember the first time thinking, like, what are they asking this question for? And the correct answer is yes. I'm lazy. And the reason that you want a developer programmer to say yes, they're lazy, because you don't want them rewriting the same code over and over again. You want a good developer that knows how to, okay, but we're not talking about that stuff today. All right, so the first thing, we have our lack of principle of least privilege. I think one of the notes that I have in here is to make sure that your administrators are using their proper administrator accounts like they should be. Notice that your domain administrator privilege or account is not called the check email or surf the internet level of privilege. So anybody that is a domain admin should only be using that account to do domain administration. If they're doing anything else, they're doing it wrong, okay? And they should certainly have different accounts for those kinds of things as well. So make sure that we have the proper levels of privilege with these accounts, because these are the kinds of accounts that we're looking for. And when they get misused and they're using them in the wrong places, there might be a pen tester coming by or somebody worse to just kind of scoop that kind of stuff up as well.
We steal their hashes because they're logged in with that account.
And one of the other kind of fun things to do as well sometimes when they tell us that they have network segregation, right? Yeah, separate networks that aren't really connected all that well. Okay, so once we kind of get one domain admin account, one of the first things that we're going to try to do is, can we log into the other one with that same account? And all too often that answer is yes. So we want to make sure that those kinds of things are separate as well. This one isn't really going to be a principle of least privilege, but more of a bad thing that I see a lot. Do you see anything in common with these two? Or if you don't really see it immediately, how about now? Okay. I see this way too often. It's one of my favorite things to do, and it's one of those things that make administrators hate me, is that I will go through and I will find the administrator password hash and your regular user password hash for the same person and compare them. Because guess what if the two hashes are the same? The password's the same. So to me, that's the same account if you have the same password on both. So all too often, this is the case in there. Once we start pulling out the hashes, we see that kind of thing as well. So yeah, now we have our legacy broadcast. We have our LMNR, NetBIOS kinds of things, which is really just a way to, what's the best way to describe LMNR, NetBIOS kinds of things?
All these workstations are talking on the network, and they're constantly asking, who is this? And that person's supposed to reply, or somebody's supposed to reply and say, I know who that is. But instead we reply and say, I'm that person, give me your hash. And then they authenticate to us because, like I said, Windows loves to just authenticate to everything it can authenticate to. That's probably the best way to sum up
that's kind of a good way. That a machine might be looking for, let's say, a file share. And it says, hey, DNS, where do I find this file share? And DNS goes, I don't know. So it says, okay, well, then how about by this IP address? Who is this IP address? And the file share should say, that's me. But one of the things that we like to do is we kind of sit in between and we create this like race condition and say, nope, that's me. And since, like Aaron said, Windows loves to help and loves to authenticate, once we say, nope, that's actually us, it'll say, okay, well, here's my password hash. And we have tools that we kind of use that for as well. So one of the best tools, and this is usually like one of the first things that I'll actually do when I am working inside the network, even before I've done anything else at all, I'll start up this tool called Responder. And what Responder does is it just sits there and listens for this kind of traffic. And one of the nice things is that if the network is going to be vulnerable to this, then as soon as Responder is able to detect that one of the machines inside of the network is looking and can't find exactly what it's looking for, responder will tell that machine, that's me, give me your password hash, and it immediately comes back. Once I see if there's any kind of traffic going on there, I kind of get a little bit excited and happy, and I start setting up other things that are going to be a little bit more fun to do with as well. There's also a Metasploit module that does the same thing, but when you have responder set up and it's as easy as just typing in responder -i ETH0, off it goes, it runs. It's all kind of nice, capturing hashes that way. And responder is going to capture one of those NTLM v2 hashes, so again, we just have to crack that offline. Or what we can do is we can relay it, which Aaron will.
So coming back to the question you asked earlier, can we pass an NTLM v2 hash? The answer is no. NTLM v2 is salted. Every single one is different. That's what that challenge response code is that responder provides. Maybe in one of our slides for the Metasploit module, actually, you saw it was like a string of 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, going all the way to 8, 8 at the end. That's a challenge response hash. And so Windows is actually going to take and create a unique hash salted with that response. So every single time you get a hash for even the same user, it's going to be different, and you have to crack it. And so it makes it a little slower to crack a net NTLM v2 hash, simply because it's not like you can take 10 different NTLM v2 hashes and take each one of them, compile it to an NTLM v2 without any kind of salt or anything, and then compare them against those other NTLM v2s. That doesn't work. So you can't do like rainbow table attacks. Instead, you have to compute every single word in your dictionary when you're cracking to that NTLM v2 with the specific salt to get the final hash that it should be to compare and see if they're the same. So that means you also can't pass it, because it's not something you can just say, have my hash here. It works as authentication. If we were to back up, let me see how many slides back it is. Yeah, I'm just going to fly back. I'm sorry. So if you see these hashes here, these are NTLM hashes. These are the hashes that are on your domain controller for all your users in that ntds.dit file I was talking about. These are passable. You can take the NTLM hash and you can pass it as a form of authentication over port 445, and Windows just accepts it, because it's pretty much the equivalent of having the password, unless you're logging into like a web panel that requires having the password instead of NTLM. So yeah, just to reference that. And so now we can talk about replaying them. So while we can't pass the hash with a net NTLM v2, which is what we're going to capture with responder or our SMB image tag, or by standing up a rogue SMB server and somehow getting someone to authenticate to our server, we can relay it. And the relaying process is pretty simple. There's one thing required though. I don't know if we have it up there. Oh yeah, so find SMB hosts without message signing required. It's a default for Windows. So Windows port 445 SMB, if you were to scan your network with the ball and scanner and it comes back and it says, you don't require SMB signing, you should pay attention to that. That's bad, because people can relay these hashes now. So make sure all of your hosts require SMB signing. If you don't require SMB signing, we can do a very simple man-in-the-middle attack. I apologize, it might be hard to read some of the text. I'm going to try and walk through it here, though. Let me see if I can turn this so I can point more. All right, can you guys still hear me? Are we good? Okay, cool. Stepping away from Mike just a little bit. So we're going to start with our attacker. Our attacker is going to be running responder. He's going to be replying to people on the network, trying to get people to authenticate to him. Once you get someone to authenticate, so in this case, step 1 is the victim up top, the green line there. And the victim's going to the attacker, because the attacker got them to do it. And they're saying, hey, can I authenticate to you, the attacker, over SMB? And the attacker's like, yeah, hold on. All right, server over here, this target without SMB signing. Can I authenticate over SMB? And the server is like, yeah, but all you have to do is encrypt this challenge I'm giving you with your password hash, and then send it back to me. And the attacker's like, all right, hold on, server. Let's go back to the victim. Victim, here's this challenge I got. You just need to encrypt it with your password hash and send it back to me. And the victim's like, okay, cool. Here's my encrypted challenge. And the attacker's like, all right, now I got the encrypted challenge. Hey, target server, here it all is. I'm technically this victim over here. Can I authenticate to you? And the server's like, sure, access granted. Authentication over port 445, we're good to go. And the attacker's like, awesome, execute this command. Port 445 is great for Windows administration type stuff, so you can use WMI, the Windows Management Instrumentation, Implementation, yeah, either way. PSExec is another option. DCOM, you have all these different options to go ahead and execute commands remotely over port 445 if they're a local admin on the server. If they're not a local admin on the server, you can still try and dump session information. Like if it's a domain controller, you can dump all the users in the domain and all the groups that way. So that's another option. But usually we're trying to relay admin hashes at this point. And then we go back to the victim at the very end, and we're like, sorry, access is denied. But the attacker's already established a session with the target. So that's how relaying works. Remediation for both responder and for SMB relaying. The first is disable LLMNR and NBTNS on your network. These are legacy broadcast protocols. They're not needed anymore, but they're on by default in Windows. So go ahead and disable them. You can do it through group policy. It's pretty simple. Follow a principle of least privilege, because like I said, we're looking for those admin hashes. We're trying to use admin hashes to get them into a, relay them to a server or crack them so we can just do all of our lateral movement over port 445. But if your users aren't running as a domain admin on their workstations, then they're not authenticating to our SMB server as domain admin, and therefore we can't really use their hash to go do something bad. So make sure users on their workstations, when they log in, they're not logging in as a privileged user. We'll get into that later when we talk about Mimikatz too, why it's another bad idea. Finally, you also require SMB signing. This is going to prevent your relaying. So we can't just relay hashes because it requires a special signing between the client and the server, and so the attacker can't be in the center doing that man-in-the-middle attack. And then another option for preventing, if you're doing principle of least privilege, using laps as well. Might not apply to the SMB type stuff there, but if we're able to compromise a host and we hash dump that host, so over port 445, we dump the local admin hash on a server, or we dump the local admin hash on another workstation. Let's say we relay your hash back to a workstation and all users in the domain are also local admins on workstations. Domain users equals in local admin group. We can dump the hashes off those workstations with that one relay. If that local admin hash, that NTLM hash, because when you dump those off a workstation, they're the NTLM, we can pass it to all the other workstations and servers in the network. And if you're using the same password across all your servers and workstations for the local admin account, we now have access to all of them. So Laps is basically, it's a password solution inside inside Windows that automatically randomizes the local admin password across all of your workstations and your domain servers. And then you can take and get that by being a domain admin and pulling it from the Active Directory or domain controller. You can go into Active Directory and look up the local admin password for each workstation and server. So we always recommend Laps. That was a mouthful, sorry. Let's have a story. So I had this client, and we've conducted pen tests for him for 3 years, and we beat them to death with weak passwords. And finally, they said, screw it. 16-character passwords. 12-character passwords for standard users. They had complexity, they had dictionary checking, and then any admin user had to have a 24-character password and above. That's strong. I mean, if they're not using common dictionary words, or if they're chaining them together in a random format, I'm not going to crack them, even if I get the NTLM v2 hash. And so that's what I did. I got the NTLM v2 hash, and I couldn't crack it. And my point of contact just had a smirky grin on his face, like, haha, can't get into any of my stuff now, because we had used his hash the past 3 years prior, cracked it, and then gotten into things. So it's always great when you uncover your point of contact's password. They hate you for it, and you love yourself for it. So he really challenged us this year. It's like, you're not going to use my account for anything. But the one thing they didn't do is they did not implement a principle of least privilege. And we told them over and over, but they're like, no, every user needs to be a local admin on their workstation. I give up. Like, why don't you just have like a second account that when they need to do the local admin stuff, they can privilege escalate to it briefly. Just it pops up the prompt and says, enter, username and password, enter a admin user and a password that there. So it's not like you're logged in as that user. Anyway, we were beating the dead horse there, asking them to do it, and they kept saying no year over year. So then we came in and we did SMB relaying. And we sat down. First thing we did was we sent him an email with an image tag, and he thought he was going to be cocky, and so he immediately clicked download images, because he's like, you can't crack my hash. Ha, I don't care, download images. But what we had it doing was relaying back to his own workstation. If you do it over one port, and then we had him do it through like a Cred SSP port. So basically it was like coming over port 80 or 443 for like HTML auth prompt. Like a basic auth prompt, and then you can relay that back to 445 on his own host. We knew he's a local admin on his own host. So basically, when he clicked download images, we just relayed it back to his laptop and then dumped the local admin hash off his laptop, and it's only for his laptop. So we pwned his laptop in the first 10 minutes we were there. Once we did that, we dumped his passwords from clear text in memory, and that actually brings us to our next finding, credentials cached in memory. So how many of you guys have heard about credentials being cached on Windows? It's a very common thing, a lot. All right, awesome. So you're all aware of the dangers of LSAS and everything Windows tries to do to protect passwords and they fail at. So yeah, do you want to actually take away LSAS? No? All right, I'll keep talking on. So for LSAS stuff, LSAS runs on every system. This is the Local System Authentication Authority. I'm blanking on terms right now. I was up too late drinking. Huh?
Yeah, I put it right there.
Oh, well, I'm bad. Local Security Authority Subsystem Service. Thank you. I was way off. Wow. Anyway, I just know it's LSAS. I see LSAS, and I go for that process to dump creds from memory. Anyway, it runs on every Windows system. It's going to cache the credentials in clear text in memory if you have it configured that way, which any Windows host, Windows 7 and below, Windows Server 2008 and Windows 7, they're automatically set to cache credentials, clear text in memory. So if I become local admin on a workstation, I can grab the LSAS process by elevating to the system user. And once I grab that, I can scan through it with like Mimikatz, let's say it's a tool. And Mimikatz will pull out all those clear text passwords that are cached. And so you can have a super long password. I'm still going to grab it out of memory. Windows 8, 8.1, they're like, all right, you know what? We can't back up. Windows 7, you can patch this. There's a patch you could apply, but then you also have to set a registry key to say don't cache wdigest passwords in clear text. But it still caches the hash, the NTLM hash. So that's good enough for me. If I grab the hash, I can pass it around the network. So I can still get access to it. Windows 8, Windows 10, they tried to create the LSAS process as a very elevated process, which even system can't access anymore. The system user should not be able to access LSAS unless you reboot the machine with a registry key set to say, bring it out of this privileged mode so that I can access it again. I don't know why. I see organizations without that set all the time. So make sure that's set at least, that LSAS is running above system level so we can't access it and dump credentials from memory. But yeah, the whole goal of LSAS, get clear text credentials or get hashes to pass. So Mimikatz, the tool I had mentioned, there's plenty of ways to get this to run on a box. You have to be local admin, or sorry, not local admin, but you have to have admin rights on the box to be able to grab the LSAS process. You can run tools like crackmap exec and say log in over 445 with this hash and give me credentials from memory. Run this Mimikatz PowerShell script basically. PowerShell Empire has one, Interpreter Metasploit has one, PowerSploit has one. My personal favorite method, if you're not trying to automate and do things very fast, is just logging into the box with RDP or just getting onto it 445 and get a command shell. And then use proc dump, so Microsoft sysinternals tool, or just right-click in Task Manager and proc dump. You do a dump file of LSAS to lsas.dmp is the default it goes to. You take that offline, and then you analyze it offline with Mimikatz. That way you're not running Mimikatz on a box, which pretty much every antivirus solution knows what it is. A lot of next-gen AVs see you touching the LSAS process, and they freak out, and they alert on it at least. They might not be able to stop you. They try to, but they might not be able to. And so they at least alert on LSAS being dumped. So that's a good thing, a positive of next-gen AV, unless you're running one that can be bypassed by just moving the directory that it's running in. I'm not going to say the name because they asked everyone to remove that from the internet. Censorship. Anyway, so yeah, Mimikatz running in Metasploit. So we have a shell on a host. No, this is Empire. I'm sorry. We have an Empire module running. We're running as admin, and then we just type in Mimikatz. It's as easy as that. We get the NTLM password hash. And then the wdigest is going to cache it in clear text. And so we see Justin has the password, !J, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. Super secure, Justin, but it is a lab. So yeah, that's, you can use Mimikatz through multiple means to get hashes. Another option, if you want to just be rogue and be a bowl in a china shop, crackmap exec with SMB, once you've captured one account that can log in everywhere, so let's say I get that local admin hash, you're not using laps everywhere, and I want to try and get clear text passwords from all your users, all your DAs, so I can just have the clear text passwords to use elsewhere. I can use crackmap exec, pass in the local admin hash, and spray it across the whole network over port 445, authenticates to all these machines, and then these machines run Mimikatz for me, because crackmap exec is telling them, hey, run this PowerShell Mimikatz command and give me the output. And so now I'm just dumping clear text passwords from tons of different targets. And sometimes there might not be clear text because they could have wdigest clear text disabled, but at least I get their NTLM password hash and I can pass it anywhere after that. So that's a really quick way to spray the whole network and just get way too many creds. If you're using a tool to detect logins across the network rapidly like that, then you'll again detect this attack. It's not very stealthy. But a lot of people still don't do that. They don't have logging to look for the same account just logged into 1,000 servers in 1 second. I think that's a red flag. I don't know. Maybe it's not. Maybe your admins do that all the time, but hey. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yep. People take it out of that. I don't know why. So, yeah, sysadmin life. So yeah, remediation, like I was talking about. You have Windows 7, Windows 8, 2008. If you have these operating systems, 8 doesn't run in the privileged. So you can still get the NTLM hashes. 8 didn't. 8.1 does. So I misspoke earlier when I just said 8 blanket. But yeah, if you're running on the older and you haven't migrated up yet, if you're still running Windows 7, because everyone knows it took 10 years to get off XP for people, so it's going to take 10 to 12 years for Windows 7 to 10 or above. You're not out of luck. You can at least get rid of the clear text passwords by setting this registry key and installing that patch. But the NTLM hashes can still be extracted, so that's the risk you balance. You should probably run laps and make sure that no one's logging in as local admin on their workstation, or domain admin on their workstation, because then you can grab that hash. Windows 8.1, prevents access to LSAS, or 8.1 and above, you prevent access to LSAS. There's LSA registry key to prevent you from grabbing that. So yeah, make sure your reg key is set. All right, story time. So did you want to do the multi-relay here, or was that me? Yeah, sure. Fly by. Actually, we'll just do a TLDR. Basically, there's another great way for cache credentials, the CAS server, so Central Authentication Server. These are like a gold mine. Everyone in your company authenticates to them. If you can ever get to that and dump credentials and clear text and memory there, you pretty much get everyone's credentials in clear text. So this story was just basically you find a CAS, and sysadmins like to name their CAS server like cas01.domain.com. So you find it that way, and then you target it, and you dump everyone's credentials in clear text, and it's great to steal their password. All right, let's fly through this. CPP Password Storage. So another option is, if you're not using laps, if you're trying to set the same local admin password across all these workstations, you might use group policy preferences, which is Microsoft. They released the option to do this, where you could use group policy preferences in groups.xml file to store the local admin password in AES 256-bit encrypted string, and then whenever your workstations got it, they decrypted it and they set their local admin password to this. Well, Microsoft, and sometime before 2012, was amazing, like they always are, and they disclosed the AES private key on MSDN. And so that key meant we could decrypt that password, and it was the same across all environments. And so any user who has access to sysvol, which is every domain users gets to sysvol because that's your login scripts, that's everything, was able to go and find the groups.xml file and then decrypt your local admin password, which is used across your entire environment because you're setting it the same. So the first thing we do when we get Creds is, let's say we responder, we crack a hash, it's a local account, we connect to the domain controller over 445, look for groups.xml, decrypt that password, and get local admin to everything in the environment. Any user can do it, and so Metasploit has a module, SMB enum GPP, super simple. Put in username, put in password, put in domain controller, go search for that file, and it decrypts it. So real quick this is a quick story of how we got the username. We were doing a pen test one time, and we didn't have any usernames, password spraying wasn't working, but instead we were able to go to a printer, a Xerox printer, and that Xerox printer had their credentials to get to the address book from the domain controller. So we were able to go to the Xerox printer, log in as admin, the default admin for their web page login, change the LDAP server that it was authenticating to say, authenticate to me. And Xerox, instead of hashing any kind of hash or anything like that with LDAP, just straight up sends you the credentials in clear text. So we opened the netcat listener on our server, changed the LDAP server for Xerox, it passes the domain username and password. We log in with that, dump GPP credentials, and we're domain admin within like the first 15 minutes of walking on site to this company. It happens all the time. Remediation, first, apply a patch. GPP is not valid anymore. Microsoft doesn't recommend it. They say use laps. Big issue though, once you apply this patch, it doesn't delete groups.xml. If you still have sysadmins using groups.xml from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever, it's still out there if they haven't deleted it, and you can still go get that password hash. And I'm willing to bet money that password, not password hash, but local admin password, I'm willing to bet money it's reused somewhere else in your environment. So we spray that same password and find other, legacy accounts configured with that password. And if you want to fly onto this.
Yeah, we'll go through this super quick. This is my fault that we're taking so long. I told Aaron that we needed to talk for longer, and clearly we've done that. So a couple more real quick ways. Does anybody remember Eternal Blue, MS-17, not Petya kind of stuff that was released in April of 2017? And Microsoft released this patch. Well, it's all still going to be vulnerable. And you also remember MS-08067? and how nice that really was, where you just kind of like do a buffer overflow and you get system level access. That's what this is. This is the new MS-08067. Still exists. We don't need creds, anything like that, to get system level access. So it's a Metasploit module that we can kind of just, not really the easiest thing to see, but we just kind of find out which hosts are going to be vulnerable, throw this Metasploit module at it, gets us a interpreter shell, full system level access, and now we can do all the kind of stuff that you saw earlier, especially with like Mimikatz. Yep, there we go. We see our interpreter, how to patch that kind of thing. Have good patch management. It's that simple as just patching for MS-17010. Same thing with Kerberoast. If you've not heard about Kerberoast, it's again going to be a feature, not a bug, where this is just how it works. Once we get any kind of level of user creds in the system, there are lots of different tools that you can kind of use that says find all the SPNs inside of Kerberos and give us the Kerberos hashes that we can then crack offline. Again, it's just how it works once we get a level of creds in order to be able to get in. How do we fix this kind of thing? Just patch it. Even Sir Paul knows that we just want to patch things. Oh, sorry. Yep. So strong passwords. So if we can't crack that Kerberos hash that we get, then it's useless for us. Thanks. Overall mitigations, kind of got a slide for all the kind of stuff that we went through. Seems that we're recording, so you can kind of go through, but we're also more than happy to share our slides with anybody that wants these kinds of things, and you can contact us with these kinds of things. It seems that we kind of used more than all of our time, so Aaron and I are more than happy to take questions outside the room so we don't distract, anything like that. But we also want to, McKenna, I got my security girl here to throw the ball out to give, if anybody wants to come to Layer 8 conference on June 8th in Providence, all about social engineering, OSINT gathering, a whole conference all about that. She's going to turn her back and throw it if anybody, back up, back away. So if anybody wants to come, if you catch the ball and you don't want to come, just give it to somebody else who does, and it gets you a free ticket. Come see me with it, and we'll get you in. Back up.
Okay. Nobody wins. It's okay. A for effort.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.